Thank you very much indeed. I'll just check the time. It is exactly 10 o'clock. Welcome everybody. Before we start, I need to inform you that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded. Please also note that all remote participants are muted at the outset of the meeting and are not only able to speak at the invitation of the chair. Please raise your virtual hand if you wish to speak, and then only unmute when the chair invites you to make your contribution. As chair, I may ask you that you are muted if you do not participate in this way. Thank you. Item number 1 is apologies for absence. So David Minery is being substituted by David Fasmer, and also Robert Tyndall is being substituted by Edward Towers. So we have a full complement of people. Okay. So do you want me to go around and introduce everybody for the record and for the benefit of people who are listening? Rosemary, would you like to start?
Yeah. Morning. Original Dartmoor Councillor for Bayston Hill, Common Sutton, Lake Group Leader.
I'm Councillor David Basmer and Councillor Brandon, Shrewsbury.
Thank you.
Councillor Roger Evans, Councillor for the London Division.
Councillor Andrew Sharrington, Councillor for Worfield.
Councillor Peggy Mullett, Whitchurch North.
Dan Thomas, Councillor from the Park.
Councillor Edward Towers for Wembrough and Wixford.
Councillor Tom Biggins for Whitchurch North.
Councillor Joyce Barrow for Oswestry.
James Bond, Executive Director of Resources and the Council Section 151%.
Andy Begley, Chief Executive of Shropshire Council.
And Claire Wild, Councillor for the Severn Valley and Chair of the meeting today. Thank you. Item number 2 is disclosable pecuniary interests. Do we have any? No. Okay. Minutes of item number 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. Is everyone okay with the minutes from the 20th of January? Can I have a proposer, please? Seconder? Yeah. All those in favour? Thank you. That's unanimous. Okay, so item number 4 is public question time. So we did have one question from Mike Streetley from Better Shrewsbury Transport. However, the question was directed at the portfolio holder. And as such, I'm not accepting the question. I'm going to pass the question over to Cabinet, because that is the appropriate place to ask the question.
Chairman, I have to say, constitutionally, it's asked here. If the portfolio isn't here, it should be asked, and has not an answer been obtained from the portfolio holder?
Okay, and as chair, it is my call. I have had legal advice, and the advice is quite clear. It is a question for the portfolio holder, and I'm not going to take it. I'm not reading out the question. I'm not reading out the answer. So that is it. Right. Thank you. Item number 5 is member question time, and I understand there are none. Item number 6 is the financial monitoring report, quarter 3. So I'm going to hand over to James to start off with. I did want to check that Willem's here. So I'll start off with James. Would you like to say a few words on the quarter 3 things?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So this is the quarter 3 financial monitoring reports. This takes projections up to the end of the financial year based on information that we had up until the end of December 2024. I'll just go a very brief overview of the main information, then over to questions. So the overarching position as at quarter 3 is an overspend, which now sits at a projected figure of £35.561 million. So this is a significant overspend for the authority. Nevertheless, set out in section 2.4 and in the later part of the report is then a forecast of adverse, central and favourable projections. And those adverse and favourable positions are moving closer to that central projection as we move closer towards the end of the year. Nevertheless, there is still risk and opportunity involved in both of those projections. Further down in table 3, a breakdown of those adverse and favourable scenarios are set out, as well as the central allocation. And then there are various tables throughout the report which demonstrate how that overspend has occurred and is occurring, where that relates to overspends due to demand pressures within service areas or overspends due to non-achievement of savings. There is an analysis in table 4B, which breaks that down in terms of the different makeup of the overspend, and a table below that for C, which shows a subjective analysis across the whole authority, showing where those unders and overspends are in terms of the different types of expenditure that we have as a council as a whole. And then in the appendix, we have a set of information that demonstrates the individual variances at an individual service level. Table 7 shows the general fund balance. So the positive is that the general fund balance is sufficient to contain the level of overspend that we have. So therefore we would be left with £3.3 million in the general fund balance. That's positive that it's still in a positive position. Nevertheless, £3.3 million is a very difficult position to be in. It's a precarious position for the authority, given the level of spending that we still have to incur between now and the end of the financial year. So work continues to be done to make that position as robust as possible, ideally to improve it. And as at period 10, which is just started now, we're asking every budget holder in the authority to ensure that they have gone through and ensure that they have updated all of their projections through to the end of the financial year, so that we have as a robust a position as we possibly can for reporting at period 10, which will then lead us through to period 11 in the outturn position very shortly after that. I'll pause there, Chair, and happy to take any questions. We also have Ben J online as well, who can take any detailed questions should they be required.
Okay, thank you very much. So, Rosemary.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the report. Just to say that just a couple of general points or any questions. One is to say that the central position has remained pretty static throughout the whole year. It hasn't really, it's fluctuated in a very minor way, making things marginally better and marginally. But the reality, I think we can all assume at this point, with 1 quarter to go, a third of which we're through already, that we are going to end up with virtually zero in the general fund balance. So that's really disappointing in terms of we've had monthly reporting, we've kept close on the financial data, but we haven't managed to change anything. And one of the things that has proven, it would appear from the documentation we received, the updates that we received, that the place spending is particularly challenged in terms of making savings. Now, I see also that, of course, adult social care and children's social care is under pressure, but there's an external factor there. And I just wondered if you could comment generally on that, not the adult social care and the children's, but on the intransigence of place and the intransigence generally of moving towards actually spending to budget.
Do you want Ben to answer that if it's detailed, or are you going to take it?
I'll just give an overview and then Ben
And then
will
I'll say that.
to that.
Okay.
Just thank you, Chair. Just as a general overview, if we look at the bottom line, you're absolutely right, it's not varied significantly. And just in looking at the bottom line, there is some positive that can be taken from that, which is basically suggesting that projections that were made early in the year were actually reasonably accurate. So I know that's kind of whole comfort, but nevertheless, there is something in that. The wider point I want to make, though, is as at the start of the financial year, there was significantly more kind of hope value, amber, those sorts of amber projections within those figures. And as we've moved through the year, we've been able to ensure that those have been delivered as projected. So you're absolutely correct. Where the difficulty is where there have been other more cross-organisational savings which we've needed to tie down to deliver in a different way. And those relate to three main areas. They relate to staffing costs, third-party spend, and income. So income, there is a plan to deliver that in the 25-26 financial year, which is not, we've been able to deliver more through 24-25, but not enough to kind of close that gap. The plan is to do that in 25-26, and there's plans in place to do that. From the third-party spend, there was significant work undertaken across the summer, where there was a plan within that to review all expenditure going out through the authority. That was done, but what we found from that was that in terms of that discretionary spend that we could turn off, it was running into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, not into the millions, in terms of that view. Therefore, we stopped that piece of work, a different tack on that, and instead have looked at the high spend areas of expenditure through third-party spend. In doing that work, which commenced before Christmas, and discussions have been had in the early part of this year, this calendar year, we've now established that there is further work that we can do from that would enable us to set a roadmap for reducing that spend through to 25-26. And then in terms of the staffing, there's been significant reductions in costs through staffing reductions. We've had a VR process, we've vacancies that have been paused or deleted. We've had capitalisation of staff, and we've had the whole resizing work. All of those have delivered significant levels of savings. However, that doesn't deliver the full amount, and that's why we now need to move to a new operating model for the council to look at different ways in which the authority can configure to bring out more savings. So, in summary, we've set a plan out. Very early on, we were able to establish what was deliverable within that plan, and what we've then done is A, fund that up as we've gone through the year, and B, set plans in place to deliver the remainder. What we're not able to do is to deliver that by the 31st of March, but we do, because of the financial position, because of the level of general fund balance that we held, we do at least have a little flexibility around that. Not much, we have a little flexibility around that, and we are using that flexibility in truth to get us through to the end of the financial year. Don't want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I'll just let Ben come in, unless you want to say anything else, Rosemary, before Ben comes back in.
I do, but I'm quite happy to wait in case Ben answers.
Okay, Ben, if you go next, and then Rosemary will come back.
Yeah, no, I think, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Dartwell makes a very reasonable challenge around that, the level of change. I think the key points that I would want to draw out, supporting very much, James and I talk an awful lot through these matters, so it won't surprise you that I've got a view which is very, very similar to the one that James set out. But I suppose the points I would add to that would be, the report is very detailed, and there are many different reasons as to why various savings targets have been challenging to deliver, or maybe have been easy to deliver. And the detail of the report is exactly seeking to address the reasons for those different variations through the different budgets. The preparation of the narratives in terms of the commentary and analysis that's provided is done jointly and collaboratively between the finance business partners, who obviously provide that kind of technical finance insight and support around it. But the narratives are reviewed as part of the normal process of clearing these reports through EMT, through the ADs, etc. So hopefully the narratives, the detailed narratives are there. If there was a simple narrative that I would try to pull out from it, I would say in some ways it's a function of complexity. So where savings are more straightforward, unsurprisingly, they're more likely to have been delivered. Where savings are less straightforward, where they're more complex, that's where we've seen some of the delays. James pointed to some of the cross-organisation work, for example. As soon as you start trying to work across the whole organisation, when we're dealing with 750 million of turnover, 2,500 staff, etc., coordinating that effectively and delivering that in line with our aspiration that I think has been a crucial challenge. We're continuing to work on that, obviously. There's a lot of detail in that, and further detail in terms of how that can be delivered through into the coming year will come forward as part of the budget papers, which will be published shortly. So I think simple answer to Councillor's question, I think it would be around understanding that complexity of cross-organisational working and change at scale. Those are some of the key issues that we've been finding through the course of the year. I hope that clarifies.
Rosemary.
Yeah, thank you both for that. Yeah, I understand those points, and that's great. I can't find it because my notes have disappeared off my copy of the agenda item, which is very helpful. Wasted hours. But there is somewhere in the report shows us the difference between the type of spending per directorate, let's say, that Ben's talking about there, where it's within directorate and where it's cross directorate, should we say, across the whole system. And it shows, I think it shows us that we're somewhere about 9 million still looking on place. I'm talking about place because it's very easy to pin down as something without so much external pressure. So place, I think is about 1 million that's cross organisation, and about 9 million shortage on the within directorate spend. So there again, that is just worrying to me, and it looks like it's not moving much in the last few months.
It's 9.3, Rosemary.
Thank you.
On the table 9.3.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
And it's about 9.3 million as well.
Yes, that's very.
There's also table 4.4b here as well, which shows the breakdown. So just to clarify, if I may, place has an overspend of 14.488 million. 9 million of that is service-led savings, and 1.7 of that is organisational-wide savings, and that's reversed when you look at people, the people directorate above, pretty much. In other words, the service-led savings have been delivered, but the organisational-wide not. And there are various reasons for that. In terms of the some of the big savings within the place directorate, one was around renegotiation of the waste contract. So, and that included waste income, but also review of the waste contract. So some of that has come through, some of that is still being worked through. There was also asset rationalisation. That was a big area that the place directorate was involved in and led on. But property rationalisation, of course, relates to the whole authority. And there is a lot of work that's being done at the moment about exactly what that could look like. The big element of that was around Shirehall. And the majority of that is now in place to be delivered. That's to be delivered this year and next year. So the plans are in place to deliver that saving in full, which is 1.5 million pounds in total across that. So that's the big one. But then in terms of other property rationalisation areas, it is far more difficult to actually agree what that looks like when we're talking about individual towns and villages across the county, ensuring that we have adequate service delivery in those areas. So from a purely financial point of view, we can say, here are the costs, that's how you take them out. From a pure asset management point of view, you can say, these are the buildings we need to close. So that's how you deliver it. But from a service management point of view, and from a managing our communities, and from a strategic direction point of view, that's proving more difficult to establish exactly what that looks like. So it's those sorts of elements, and we may have to actually go back and look at that asset rationalisation view and say we want to make different decisions about how we want to interact with our communities, and that is a bigger decision than was taken at the start of the year. So that's all part of the process that we're going through, and it's where we're tied into those kind of big areas. There are big gains to be taken, but sometimes there's a lot of work to get that through. Once that work is completed, actually the saving can flow through quite quickly. It's quite a different degree of complexity within the people directorate, for example, where you're sort of coming out from a different way. You're saying effectively with the people directorate savings, as an example, you were going to spend 10 million.
you now, with the expected demand, that 10 million is going to go up to 15 million. So if you can rein it back to 14 million, you've saved £1 million. You still spent £4 million more, but you've saved £1 million. So to deliver those savings, I'm not suggesting in any way it's simple, but you've got a different way into it than you have within place, which is there are existing services now, and we need to remove those in some way or another. So it's a different equation, different requirements. Nevertheless, we have to tackle it. It has to be delivered because we don't have this money. It's been taken out of the budget, and that means we have to deliver these savings over the fullness of time.
Okay, thank you. So, Ben, you've got your hand up. Would you like to come back?
Yeah, thank you again. Just to support the points that James was raising there, my comments would be that if I filter through and look specifically at those service-led savings as set out in Table 4B, and you can see that in Place Directorate there's a high level of underachievement or under-delivery around those. Just to pull out exactly which ones we're talking about, it is about property rationalisation. That's about 2.5 million of that figure. Looking at the waste contract with Veolia, that's about 2 million. Other fees and charges, changes and increases, 1.8 million, and another 1.8 million around green waste. So I think, again, to perhaps slightly develop the point I made previously around complexity, we use these categories to try and understand, to provide lenses through which we can understand the overall financial position. In the way that we have cut the division between organisation-wide and service-led, a lot of service-led savings, and they are genuinely, I think, service-led savings, but they have massive interdependencies with other issues. So we know, councillors, officers know how complex introduction of green waste charging has been. That is something with a series of complex interdependencies, albeit it's being led through by the waste service. Similarly, rationalisation of property, there is an awful lot of work, as James was alluding to, going on through the property and assets management teams. But obviously that also depends a lot and has a big impact on other areas of the council. It's not just within the property team. So I think it, if you like, expands out a little bit the problem. It's not just that it's organisation versus service-led, it's where those interdependencies exist, and those have been some of the issues that have been really difficult to land. Again, looking at it from the opposite perspective, just as James was, if you consider what's going on within social care, for example, there are less interdependencies across the organisation. Lots of interdependencies with the local care sector, of course, and with local residents, of course, but it's perhaps more contained from that perspective. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm hearing a lot of words, and I've heard them last year, and I heard them years before. If I stay with this directorate, have we learned no lessons? I do note the words in it which says savings were overestimated on page 25. This directorate has overestimated for the last, I don't know how many years, and I don't know that it's connected with the other directorates. I'm looking at the this directorate, and if one looks at it, £14 million overspend when it was supposed to be 51. That's a 28% overspend. And then if you look at the actual figures, you'll see waste management, £1.8 million overspend, or not achieved, whichever you want to use it. That has been there for the last 3 years, as projected. It failed every time.
Okay, do you want to just cut Ben off and let him come on?
If you go further down that chart, Assistant Director of Homes and Communities, £2.7 million overspend. Highways and Transport, 1.9 or £2 million if you round it up, overspend. Every year it's been that directorate has been overspent. I note now that due to an internal reorganisation, that directorate no longer exists, I don't think, and it's being reallocated around it. So yeah, I am concerned. I think we all need to be concerned at the over-optimistic, overestimation savings that have been made by that directorate year on year on year. How that's going to be tackled in the budget for next year, when the Police Directorate, although it's listed in the report, which is considered later on, as I understand it, the Police Directorate is being amalgamated or reorganised into different sectors. And maybe the Chief Executive could explain that, but that may be for another time. But I just cannot understand how year on year we keep on being told that it's the social services which is causing the problem with the council. If that £14.5 million was saved, we will be up to a general reserve level of where we want to be, of somewhere around about £15 million. So it's that one that I'm focusing on about it. And I can go on further on it that is direct in it. There's, as I say, there's also the transformation budget, £2.7 million. And then again, transformation budget, £4.2 million overspent. This council is in problem because it isn't living within its budget, or the budget that was set last February was faulty. And to hear that it became clear quite early on that the budget was in trouble means that the budget setting problem is in trouble. And looking at what we've got to save for next year, I wonder whether the council can. Again, also, I note in this report, last comment, Chairman,
Right.
that it quotes 57% of the savings were made. In the following report later on, it quotes 77% of savings were saved. I know it's 60 million and 90 million, but can we be consistent in the report? How much has been saved this year? There, is it 57% or 77%? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so I've got three people who want to speak. So I'm going to bring Leslie in first and then Gwilym.
Just make sure I'm off on mute. Thank you, Chair. I suppose really, having listened to what Councillor Evans has just said, I'd just like members of the committee to reflect on the reality of the situation. And, you know, Councillor Evans' comments about I thought it was social care. Well, when you spend 80% of your budget on social care, there's only one place to take that money from, and that money inevitably comes from place. And the simple fact is that whilst you may say the budget was wrong, or, you know, what I would say to you is the budget is not enough. And that's a problem that we are having to wrestle with, as you well know, Councillor Evans, because we're wrestling with that at the moment. We simply do not have enough funds to cover the amount of services that we need to offer. Now, if you've got a better way of slicing up this budget, I am yet to hear it, because, and that's not aimed at Councillor Evans, that's aimed at everybody. Because the simple fact is, when you are spending so much of it on the most vulnerable people in our society, it makes absolute sense that it's the other areas that are going to get squeezed. And if I asked Councillor Dan Morris or the officer Andy Wild, the public want their roads mended. Constantly, cabinet members are having to look at, do we take money away from social care, or do we leave the roads, or at least manage the roads to the best of our ability? And that's what we're doing. I think actually, in general, there is a bit of a dose of reality needs to be around this table. And as everybody is saying, you know, we know what's going to happen after the next election. Well, I think that dose of reality could be very, very close around the corner, because you sat in those collaborative budgets meetings, most of you on this committee, or certainly the group leaders on the committee, you know how tight the finances are. This is not going to change, not without significant intervention from government. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Gwilym, would you do you want to talk after James, or you have to go now?
I'll only be very brief, Chair. I think Leslie said most of what I was wanted to say. I think my point is this isn't a parish or town council precept. This is an organisation spending £700 million plus. We knew there would be slippages. That is the whole reason we pumped up reserves at the beginning of the year, because what we are trying to achieve may not be delivered within a 12-month period, and we were well aware of that. The only reflection I would also have, Chair, is we've been in this situation for the last 2 to 3 years where this organisation has delivered the biggest savings in living memory. And when I talk to the LGA, and when we talk to the finance team of the LGA, they say to me, how on earth can you deliver £50 million worth of savings in 1 year? And we did. Yeah, and that we're being criticised because we haven't done the other little bit. It's laughable. Thank you, Chair.
And just to finish off, really, I think when we all became, well, some of us became unitary councillors in 2009, I think the percentage of our budget that was spent on social care was just under 50%. And of course, now we're at over 80%. And so Wayne Rogers says every year, you know, places overspent, the money has to come from somewhere, you know, and it puts incredible pressure. And perhaps the other thing that that is said, but I will remind you, is that over 80% of our budget is spent on social care, and that is for 3% of the population. So the other 97% of the population, services they receive, if you like, are made out of 17%, 15 to 17% of the budget. And those are the kind of pressures that this authority has to face. So, do you have anything to say, James, before I?
If I may share just a couple of quick points, just to deal with the point that Councillor Oakham raised around the performance reporting. The thing to remember is that the actual MTFS savings for this year was the £62.5 million. That was the figure that was taken out. That's what we are reporting on in terms of our overall performance. What we do within the financial monitoring report is we say, but it's not just that bit. Actually, we will give you an oversight of the entire financial position. So we don't hide away from that. But from a performance reporting point of view, we reported the savings from last year, we reported on the savings from this year, and next year we reported on the savings for next year. So they are slightly different things. I accept that there is confusion around that, and I apologise for that. But we feel that's probably the best way of trying to describe it. Otherwise, I just reiterate some of the other points that have been made around the way in which the budget's set and the difficulties that we have. Fundamentally, we went into this financial year knowing it was on the back of the biggest savings plan that we'd had in the previous year. We hadn't expected for 24-25 to be quite as high. It developed over the year as we worked through 23-24, and therefore, as part of that, we knew we needed significant mitigation against the risk of delivering a second, if not third year of incredibly high savings within the year. Hence, that's why we have the general fund balance. If I was, glass half full at the start of the year, I'd been saying we're building up those reserves for the future. That's what we want to do. The reality is that we needed that mitigation to get us through the year, and that's clearly been the case as we've worked our way through that. The same will be the case for 25-26, but we will not have that level of resilience going into 26-27, which is why the plans that I talked about take us into 25-26. They don't take us beyond that.
Okay, thank you. Roger, you want to come back on something?
Yeah, I take all the points on board, but we are a scrutiny committee. We are here to scrutinise the budget, scrutinise the Q3 report, and that's what I'm doing. I didn't put the figures together for last February, when the council was presented with a budget that was said that this is what would happen during this current year we're in now. So I'm scrutinising the budget that was set last February. The budget, and I'll stay with this directorate again, the budget that was agreed, officers agreed it, brought it forward. The portfolio holders obviously were involved in it. So the portfolio holders and the cabinet brought it forward, and the cabinet proposed to council that this is our budget and this is what we're presenting. What I'm scrutinising is that yet again, the council failed to deliver the budget. And I understand the other pressures on the council, but this directorate, it was said, this is the budget for this year. And it is in page 25 that we overestimated the speed with which the savings could be made. That's an honest statement and I accept it. But what lessons have we learned? Because this has happened for several years, that the budget has been presented like this. And as a scrutiny committee, we need to scrutinise the figures and see where we are. And I think the table in 9.3 and 5A on page 28 shows it. And it says that are more challenging to implement. PwC as our transformation partner play a key role in supporting delivery in this area. They were brought in to help. They don't appear to supply the help that we need because the budget is still being overspent. It is not meeting the criteria that the council were told we would meet for this current year. And I have great fears for this coming next year, because there are things which come out later on which do not appear in the later report, which have a lot of potential revenue consequences. But I'll leave it at that for this at the present, Chairman.
That's with my mic off. Yeah. Yeah, what's happening there? That's okay. Other microphone, just special effects. Mine are on, yeah. Make a lot of noise. Just want to. Sounds like it's going. You take the batteries out or something. It's not. It's there. I think it's doing something. It's up there. It's one of us hanging, one of them me. Do you want to get an idea to okay, do you want to stop the meeting, take this offline and see if bringing us back on helps?
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
Yeah, you can feel it.
Yeah.
Feel it.
Yeah. Right. Thank you, and welcome back to the meeting. Sorry about that. We had an IT issue. So I think we were at the point where Rosemary was going to ask a question, following on from your earlier question and Roger's.
Sort of, yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's more in response to what Councillor Picton said earlier. I just wanted to remind people that at last month's meeting, this meeting, as you can see in the minutes, Councillor Picton reminded us that since 2012, Shropshire Council has had to save 450 million. It's worth noting that central government funding to local authorities from the decade from 2010 was cut dramatically, 60% cut, more than half cut. So, Claire, when you talk about social care representing 50% of our budget, our spend in 2012, I think you said, yeah, there's your answer.
I know.
There's your reason for it. So 60% or 60 pence out of every 100 pence of funding was removed, slashed from our spending budget. So while we say, Councillor Picton says that only government can resolve this, I agree in part that we must evolve, and we simply can't expect to be saved. The government will repair the damage, but it can't and won't happen overnight.
Hey, thank you for that. So I'm going to allow the leader to come back on that one.
Yes, of course you would, and you'd expect me to say this, wouldn't you? And I wholeheartedly thank you, Rosemary, because your government obviously did us a major favour by repairing the damage. It left us circa £30 million worse off this year than it did last year because of its extremely skewed bias towards urban areas against rural areas. And I'll leave it at that, Chair.
Yes, well, and that is a fact that we can get fact checked. Right, so our next question is from David Basma.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to concentrate on capital and two elements of that really. Firstly, if you go to table 3 on page 5, you've got the different scenarios set out for a favourable situation, what we are currently what's been estimated, and also an adverse situation. And if you look at capital receipts, the adverse situation is a problem of 17.9 million. Now, that's if you look at the difference between the favourable between the current option we're kind of looking at and the adverse situation, there's quite a significant difference, quite a big difference between the favourable situation, the current situation, and a substantial part of that is made up of failure to achieve targets in terms of capital receipts. So I'd just like to give more information about that, because currently it says here that current capital receipts are 26.9 million, potential shortfall of 17.9 million. So it's obviously there is a problem there, which I think we ought to know more about and have more information about. And the other thing is the elephant in the room. There's very little information here about the North West Relief Road. That is obviously has a huge influence over the council's financial situation. It is a great problem. It's hardly mentioned here, and I want to know why we have not got more information about the financial situation of the North West Relief Road and its effects on the government's financial situation.
I think the fact of the matter is, us personally, council don't have much money actually invested in North West Relief Road. I will ask James to answer your other questions.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, okay, in terms of the 17.9 million which you've shown in the advert, so you're absolutely correct. This is the key element as to why the adverse scenario is significantly worse than the central scenario. So just to give a bit more explanation around where that comes from. Over the current financial year, we've assumed that there would be around about we've said 26.9 million. Start with that figure, 26.9 million pounds worth of expenditure on transformation purposes, and that's broken down into 3 main areas. One is staff involved in transformation, which can be charged to capital. A second is the contract payments for our transformation partner, PwC. And the third area is where on the back of the transformation we can reduce our staffing requirements. It's a well-established approach that there are certain elements of redundancy costs that can also be capitalised. So fundamentally, what you have is three sets of expenditure there, which are fundamentally revenue in nature, but are allowed under accounting rules and based on the statute that we work to, can be charged through the capital, which then allows you to deliver capital receipts to pay for all that. So if we can't deliver the capital receipts, that expenditure which is being charged to capital ends up back in the revenue account, and that's why you would show. So the gap of 17.9 is the difference we currently estimate between the level of capital receipts that we have and that we have in hand and that total cost. So there's a number of variables in that. First of all, we might not spend the 26.9 that we said at the start of the year, and we won't. It'll be less than that, it's a reality. And as we get closer to the year, we'll work out what that is. The big variable in that is the voluntary redundancy payments, because people have been who have been given voluntary redundancy, their leave date may actually be post 1st of April, and therefore they won't fall within this financial year, and therefore they won't be a cost in this financial year. So there's variables in terms of the amount of expenditure that we will incur. The second variable is this is the gap between that estimate and the level of capital receipts we have. There are still capital receipts to be delivered every year. And again, I've said this to the group a number of times. A capital receipt that comes in on 31st of March will still count as a capital receipt in this financial year. So right up until the last day of the financial year, we can never be sure what that value looks like. So, so we've got those two variables, which then give us the overarching position. Do I think that we can deliver sufficient capital receipts in the year to remove that risk altogether? Potentially we could. Potentially we could find ourselves in a slightly better revenue position than we're anticipating, and that £3.3 million we've got in reserves, we could apply that. Or that could be a bigger figure that we could apply. There could be more capital receipts that come in, etc., etc. So there's ways in which that can be managed. Alternatively, we've looked at other requests, other options and opportunities, and so we've been speaking to CLG as part of that to say, are there options around how we could manage that? And what the government gives us as is available to every authority is a capitalisation direction around transformation costs, which I just explained. So that exists for every authority, and all we have to do is every February we have to ask council for approval that we apply that, and that's what's given. But on top of that, there is another direction which allows you to use borrowing rather than capital receipts. And from our point of view, we have the capital receipts to deliver to finance the cost of the cost of transformation. The problem we've got is this line on the 31st March. And if we were allowed to just carry that cost over, the capital receipts would come in the next financial year, it wouldn't be an issue. But we're not allowed to. And what we're not allowed to do is have expenditure exceeding our levels of reserves by the end of the financial year. So that's why we have to have a direction in place to enable us to cover that. We might only borrow for a couple of months while capital receipts come in. We might borrow for a longer period of time, but that's all that is. So what we're being very clear about here is that's the scale of the problem should those scenarios not work their way through. Now, the likelihood of those not working through is very low because we would end up, all sorts of options would be available to us to declare should that become a problem. But as it stands at the moment, we've just been open and transparent around that. Lower down in that list, we then talk about project risk. And within that, you mentioned the North East Relief Road. That is absolutely one of the project risks that we have. And what we're showing in this financial year is that there is no financial risk associated with that. The reason being that we have council approval for £45 million worth of expenditure by the end of this year, and we have the budget in place to fund £45 million worth of expenditure this year. The majority of that is coming from government grant from the Local Life Wages Fund, but there is other funding in place which enables us to conclude that expenditure. You asked a question at Audit Committee, and I gave you the response there, which is the budget is 44.8, I think, from memory, and we are
expected to spend significantly below that by the end of the year. We're certainly way below that now, and we will be below that by the end of the financial year. So therefore, the risk associated with that project in this financial year is fairly minimal. The same as the project risk associated with the Oswestry Innovation Park or the Whitchurch swimming pool. You know, all of those projects have risks associated with them, but not significant enough to actually show within this in this financial year. I accept that there are risk associated going into 25-26. That will be reflected within the medium-term financial strategy. It's not reflected in the report that we will be seeing later in this agenda, because that is the cabinet report rather than the full council report, and we are working through the collaborative budget process to ensure that all of those risks are being identified, clarified, discussed, so that we can then build that into the full council report, which will go to council on the 27th of February.
Okay, thank you. I'm very conscious.
So just come back. Is that right, Francis? Can I just come back?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You mentioned about the fact we might need to borrow money to cover the capital, the problem we've got in the capital area. What do you have any idea of how much we might need to borrow? And you said it might be for a couple of months, or I mean, because presumably that has an effect on next year's. You know, the fact we're borrowing money has an impact on next year's financing.
If I may, Chair. So absolutely. Now, if we are currently. I don't want to get into the debate about our treasury strategy. We talked about that at the Royal Committee, but we are at the moment our levels of borrowing have come down, and our levels of cash therefore have come down, and that's quite reasonable in the way that we've managed that. We are in a position now where we need to borrow because we're currently under borrowed based on our level of expenditure within capital programmes, etc. But now is not the right time to tie into 20, 30, 40 year borrowing because interest rates are higher than we think they will be in perhaps 6 or 12 months' time. So we are short-term borrowing at the moment from a cash flow point of view rather than from an ongoing strategic point of view. And we've got to keep those things in balance. And what I'm talking about here is we would need to we would borrow for the purposes of capitalisation, so we do that purpose, but the length of time over we borrow will be fairly short. Now the reality is we're borrowing for cash flow anyway, and therefore you probably won't even notice that. We're still making a return on the investments that we have, but all it means is that investment levels will be slightly lower because we have to factor in the borrowing costs as part of that. That's already taken into account in terms of our projections for the 25-26 budget. So we factored that in. If we don't have to borrow, we will end up with better treasury management results than we've currently got estimated in the MTFs.
Okay, thank you. So, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. Continuing on the capital, we're told during the year some of our costs have been capitalised. This is the Q3 financial monitoring report. I can't see anything about capital and where and what our capital is. As I understand it, our capital has reduced to about £22 million now, 20 million, £22 million now. So it's gone down. Okay, it was 175 a few years ago. But I'm looking at page 64, which has got capital expenditure and the budget. But I can't see anywhere where the Northwest Relief Road, if we look at that, the cost of that at present in our books is somewhere just over £80 million. About 20-30% of that is committed by Shropshire Council as paying for. We've actually paid money out on that capital project of double figures, and it's varied depending on what you read, 20, 30, 40 million pound. Council, I think, will be told. We councillors have not been told, although in the media it's saying 178. However, 80 million pound is what it is in the books. So much coming from government, so much from other sources. I can't see anywhere where the capital spend so far on the Northwest Relief Road appears in any of these papers. I would have thought it should, because I would assume some of our capital, maybe some of the government's capital, has been spent. Are we just spending government capital and we're not using any of ours at present? I am just not sure, because it isn't mentioned in this report that I've seen. I don't know if it is, and this is supposed to be Shropshire Council's financial monitoring report Q3, but I can't see anything about that. It isn't even mentioned in the risk strategy, which I would have thought on page 3 or 4, wherever it is, should have had traffic lights in it to show what is there. There's a number of risks there which are highlighted. Capital is one of them. So I'll leave it at that. Shouldn't there be something in here mentioning where we are with capital, as this is a financial monitoring report for the whole council?
Ben, would you like to answer this question?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to respond to the point Councillor Evans is raising, this was the subject of some considerable discussion as part of the overview and scrutiny working group around capital programme, which was through, I think, last year, and I know myself and Tom were quite heavily involved in that. To clarify the position, the way that the capital programme is reported is that there's a number of different elements to capital spending. We often use the terms aspirational, priority and programme to designate the different stages in these. Aspirational schemes are where it looks like there is a scheme which could or should be developed, but we don't yet have complete clarity on what the nature of that scheme might be, and therefore we don't understand the detail of the costs associated with it. A priority scheme is a scheme which is being progressed because that has been indicated for different reasons as being a priority, but that hasn't yet progressed to a full business case. The capital programme, as reported within this report and set out in the Appendix 7, the capital programme includes all of those areas where councillors have approved progress on spend further to the confirmation of a business case. Now, that's all a little bit technical and bureaucratic, and I apologise for that. Northwest Relief Road doesn't easily fit within that setup that I just described, that scheme, if I can put it that way. Northwest Relief Road hasn't yet had a confirmed business case approved. There are a range of complex areas. I know I'm an accountant, not a planner, so forgive me if I'm getting any of this wrong, but the process here is that we need to progress working with government to getting the sort of planning questions resolved, and then being able to progress to a business case. The business case can then be approved or rejected. The scheme can then be included or excluded from the council's capital programme in the normal way. There is something around this which I'm conscious of, which is that members may feel that officers, myself included, are perhaps hiding behind a process in order to evade fully reporting on some of this. But I hope it's clear from what I'm trying to describe that actually it is not immediately clear exactly how to report on the status of the Northwest Relief Road, because its status is not clear, and that's due to factors outside of the council. But equally, that there isn't, I would say, there is no inconsistency in terms of the numbers which are being presented. It is a complex scheme. Numbers have been represented at different points during the course of that scheme, which has been doing sort of in the air in different ways since about 2017, I think. So we're now getting on for sort of 7 or 8 years of discussion around the scheme. Logically, all of those numbers have changed. I think please, members should be reassured that James and I do understand the position on the numbers, and we can give you an up-to-date set of numbers as to where we think it's up to, but so much is dependent, as I say, on factors outside of the council. So I apologise if it is not clear within the report. It's not clear because it's not immediately evident exactly how best to report it. It doesn't fit easily within the scheme as I've set out, and that some of the numbers do remain considerably uncertain because we know where we're up to, but we don't know where we're going to be next around. I hope that clarifies a little. I don't know, James, if you wanted to bring in anything else around that.
Yeah.
We seem to have done it the other way around, so apologies, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah. Sorry, I should have done. So I think clarification on how much capital we've actually spent, because the majority of it is a grant from the government and from the LEP.
Yeah.
So I think that needs to be made clear, James.
Yeah.
But I'll leave the rest with you.
Okay, so yeah, a couple of quick things. Firstly, just to correct, I think you mentioned capital's reduced to 20 million from 170. I think you're talking about cash balance there, not capital.
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
So
yeah,
just
cash,
clarify.
yeah, cash.
Capital
Sorry,
has
yeah.
reduced. It's just our cash balances
Yeah.
have reduced. Absolutely correct in terms of cash balances. In terms of the capital programme, Ben's explained the difference between the capital strategy and the capital programme is absolutely correct. So the majority of the expenditure falls outside of that. In terms of where we are right now and today, in this report, what we do is we produce a summary of the capital programme, which is shown in Appendix, is it Appendix 8 or 7? Appendix 7. And within that, there is a table then that breaks down the expenditure at a very high level. So you'll see there, for example, there's Highways Capital, which has a budget for quarter 2, which was set at £43 million. Within that £43 million will be the element relating to the North West Relief Road for this current financial year. There will be lots of expenditure that's incurred in the previous financial years, and as Ben has pointed out, there'll be lots of expenditure that will be incurred in the future financial years if the scheme goes ahead. So what this is just demonstrating is that overall position. What we don't do is separate out individual schemes within that. There's no reason why we can't do that if that was required, but we just bring together all of the highways capital into one place. So just pick up on the point the chair made. We have an overall budget of £44.8 million for the North West Relief Road. That is not in the current financial year. Lots of that was spent in previous years, going back 4 or 5, well, I think it's nearly 10 years in relation to that. And the majority of that funding was built around an original budget of £74 million, of which £54 million was government funding, large local majors fund. So the majority of the spend that we've undertaken so far has indeed been within that government grant funding. And the only elements that council has put in has been some SIL money, some Section 106 money, some capital receipts, and those have all been, and there's other bits and pieces, but all of those have been effectively match funding. And then if you bring in the Oxford Link Road, there's also the same again, but also the LEP funding that came in. So all of that funding is put together. As we spend through the year, we have to apply some of that other match funding. But where we don't have to apply the match funding, we use the government funding, which enables us to benefit from our cash flow position and keep capital receipts for other purposes while we don't need to apply them in year for things.
Roger. I do think, though, all this information has been in reports. I'm sure I've seen reports that list all this information. But anyway, Roger, you wanted to come back.
Yeah, I'm going on the report that's before us today.
Yeah.
Being scrutinised.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, but I think I know the answer, but I'd like clarification and reassurance. I was at a meeting recently where there were some councillors there from Herefordshire, and they remarked about the asked how the North West Relief Road was getting on. I said, progressing like that. And they said, because what we are doing in Herefordshire is examining the LEP money that you have got for it, which was originally down for Herefordshire to spend, and with their project being cancelled, came back into the pot and reallocated to the Oxford Relief Road. And the councillors there told me, we're investigating to see how and whether we can actually recall that because of where you are with your road schemes. Now, I don't think they can because they cancelled it. So I'm asking for clarification that that LEP money is there and Herefordshire has very little chance of getting any of it back.
My understanding was the LEP is no more. It is dead.
Well,
anyway, there you go, James.
It was referred to by James earlier, a few minutes.
Yeah. So I'll just ask the leader to clarify.
The LEP is, as you rightly say, Chair, the LEP is no longer in existence. It is now the Marches Joint Committee. The Marches Joint Committee have agreed that the monies that were put aside by the LEP originally for the Oxon Link Road remain as they are. The only reason that money would be returned to the Marches Joint Committee is if the road projects were to be cancelled in their entirety.
Thank you.
Okay, clear on that. Right. So one last question and then we're going to move on. Andrew.
Firstly, apologies for having to step out earlier. Just a bit oppressively hot in here, making me feel quite ill. What we're seeing here is pinch point. That we're coming to the nub of it. We're having to make savings against a projected surplus of 3 million quid, which on an 800 and something million budget is not a fat lot. In my previous experience, one of the things that gives me comfort was to ask the team when they were putting out projected savings, put an index against that saving about how easy it is to deliver. Well, 1 is really easy and 5 is really difficult. And then if you've got a small saving that's really difficult to deliver, you shouldn't be concentrating on that. You should be concentrating on the big stuff that's actually quite easy. Providing that kind of index does 2 things. It solves wheat from chaff. It gives you your top 5 priorities to immediately go for. And the second thing is that if you share it with this audit committee, you can give some kind of directional indication about this whole mass of pages and pages of savings as which ones would really make the difference right now. Also, when you have that level of index, that's very simple to do. You could do it in an afternoon with your team. And once you get to the middle of, 500 grand here and 500, forget it. It's just not worth worrying about. But it would then also give you an indicator of how much resource have I just identified in my index 1 through 5, easy to difficult, in comparison to how much resource have I actually got. And you'll come to a line where, with the resource I have, I can deliver these top 10 or whatever it is. But unless I have a change of pace, or some more expertise, or some more input, or whatever, the rest of it just can't be done with the horsepower I've got. And that's when we really understand an analytical basis for answering the questions that have been banging around this table for the last hour, which is it doable? Because then you can come back and say, if I had another 5 people at a cost of £350,000 or whatever the number is, I can save within the next financial year 8, 10, 12, whatever million pounds. Give me the resource. I know that it's scaling down headcount and it has to be done, but it's just return on effort. And really, I don't think that until we have some kind of indicator like that, some form around a plan that we can see and understand, and some projects will be, when you thought they were a 2, they'll actually turn out to be a 4, they're much harder than you think, and some that you thought were going to be 3 are actually 1 because they just fall into place. That's the way it's going to happen. But at least we'd have something we can do on. Whereas right now, I appreciate you trying to do your best to provide the information, but it really doesn't give us the fundamental answer to the question that we need to be satisfied with, which is right here, right now, where we are, not where we'd like to be, can it be done? And is it very feasible? Is it a 50-50 case? Is it, we'd like to think it could, but actually it can't? And then you can come back and ask us for stuff. Now, can we have a look at that in the next Scrutiny committee? In terms of just directionality, it would help. In terms of actually putting a value on your resource, it would be even better, wouldn't it?
Okay, I'm going to get the chief exec to speak first, and then it's optional if James wants to say anything, but then I'll follow up with Ben. Andy, if you'd like to start.
Thanks, Chair. It's just in terms of responding with some of the detail that you're suggesting there. I think it's important to recognise that the whole programme, the whole transformation programme, not this year, but the past 2 years, that's involved partners from PwC. You know, you don't need me to explain their sort of heritage, but just to explain that the simplified version of what you said in terms of a risk matrix, in terms of what that risk looks like compared with the application of resources, the return of investment. That has happened at a grand scale and a micro scale on a weekly basis. We go through that kind of lens. We look at this programme and the projects within it through that lens, scrutinise it internally to make sure that it's delivering, that it's on track. If it's not, what remedial action do we need to take? And that's done as part of an ERB board that meets on a weekly basis. It's done as part of meetings that happen between those boards, between our transformation partners. If we don't have the skill sets to do that, then that's the point of PwC and their access to those particular skills. So we make sure we're bringing those in. In relation to having sight of that through scrutiny, formal scrutiny process, each part of the programme has been to this committee over the past 12 months. Each element of that has then been subdivided into what those different projects look like. And I think committee, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think committee's had an opportunity to talk through all those in granular detail, and we've moved forward. That combined with the collaborative budget process, again, is just trying to create that transparency. So I think your comments are well made in terms of the challenge that needs to happen in relation to this. I'm just as chief exec trying to provide assurance that the internal mechanisms through which we're managing this are there and are akin and an enhanced version of what you said.
And can I just follow on from that? You know, a lot of our savings are ag-rated, red, yellow and green. And it was something that Councillor Evans brought up, I think, at the collaborative budget process. To go through everything we're doing would take years. So to some extent, we do have to rely on the officers to provide us with that rating of whether it's possible, impossible, or maybe possible. So I think all those things are being done. But I will pass over to Ben. Ben, would you like to add anything to that?
So just very quickly, very simply, much of what Councillor just requested, described, is in place exactly as Andy has just confirmed. I think the point around is it doable? I think actually in the world of local government, just about everything is doable. The difficulty is it has an impact on residents, it has an impact on legislative requirements. We're working in a dynamic environment where some of those legislative requirements, such as food waste collection, is a good example. Those things are changing, and so we're working in that kind of very dynamic environment and working with members to ensure that there is a sense of alignment around officer delivery of councillors' policies and policy decisions. Whilst at the same time, I think there is something around officers are already, as Andy was describing, where we can, we are skilled at this stuff and we're doing it, but it's not necessarily the stuff that should be brought forward for scrutiny in that way, because that's just part of the enactment of the policy direction that's set out by councillors. But also there are other elements of this where I think it's helpful, and this is a really important conversation around, well, what are the policies, what are the priorities? And for officers, it's quite a big challenge because we know we're heading towards an election. So what we're trying to do is make sure that we prepare the ground effectively for whatever it is that happens in May. But we will still continue to need to deliver all the services that the council needs to deliver. It's quite a big challenge, and I don't think perhaps it's maybe not represented back to this committee, but we can obviously do something about that if possible. But just to echo Andy's points, we do this all the time. I hope that clarifies and gives some assurance. Thank you.
It was not my intention to disparage the professional capability of the executive team. It's just a question of digestibility. And if you've got your top 10 projects then the rest of the, it's classic Pareto. If you've got the top 10, then the rest of it is the also rans. And if you are on track and you have the resources, if you're confident, okay. And it's a very simple answer to a very simple question. And it can be dispensed with in 30 seconds. I'm just making the point that because we've got reams upon reams upon reams of information, you are doing your best to provide that information for us to understand. It's simply that within this format, it is quite difficult to get down to the nitty gritty and get to the basics of the scrutiny of what, where, and how.
May I come back on that, please, Chair?
Just let me speak first, then I'll let you go. I think we did have a task and finish group on the capital projects, and I'm pretty sure Julian Dean or Edward chaired it. Was it Julian?
Yes.
It was Julian Dean.
Not me.
And that's exactly what we did.
Mhm.
And that was done about 12 months ago. And one of the things that I had brought up when we talk about all these things is to actually put all these things on the member portal, because a lot of the questions that are asked, the information is there in some great detail. And it hopefully that will happen. Ben.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, just again, Councillor, to the points that you're raising. I think I'm a bit surprised, if I'm honest, to hear what you're saying, because Table 3 sets out the 7 key indicators that James and I work through every month in detail to understand not so much what some of the savings priorities are, but to understand the key risks facing the authority. And I think that's appropriate, and that's what we should do. I would say I don't think it's so much the case that we're doing our best around this. I think that we are working in intensely difficult circumstances, and actually we are doing a pretty good job of trying to provide as digestible an account as possible for councillors. The difficulty is I'm hearing different requests from different councillors here. One request is to make it fairly straightforward and digestible. The other is to provide more and more detail. We will always be caught between those two objectives, unfortunately, but I would refer the councillor back to Table 3, which sets out the key risks, and also to the appendices to the report, which set out very clearly where savings have been delivered, haven't been delivered, with commentary all the way through the report in different ways. This is a big, complicated organisation. We try to make it as digestible as we can. My apologies if that's difficult, but I think there is something about it is all in there in the report. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
You should improve your ability to knit Foregate, I think.
Right, okay, thank you. So I'm going to finish with this particular item now. I'm going to propose that we actually note this item. Yeah, have I got a second? Yeah. Can we just have a show of hands just to make sure? Okay, everyone happy with that? Thank you. So we're moving on now to item 7, which is the performance monitoring report quarter 3. And I am going to ask Councillor Macy and Laura Carlos to come to the front, if she will, and then if we've got any questions, we can just answer them directly. Thank you. I think you just give Laura the mic there, so I'm supposed to have got one there. Okay, thank you. So, would you like to speak, James, or would you like Rob to do the intro? Or
Comfortable, whichever way.
yeah, okay, go on then. Right, so I'm going to ask Councillor Robert Macy to do a little bit of an intro in the performance monitoring report quarter 3.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it reasonably brief as an introduction, because I think we're pretty established at having these reports to the committee now. So I'm pleased to introduce the quarter 3 performance monitoring report. It provides a comprehensive update as ever on our progress in delivering the strategic objectives set out in the Shropshire Plan. It highlights our achievements, ongoing challenges, and the financial context in which we're operating. This quarter, we have updated 52 performance measures. We've had notable improvements in areas such as adult social care, school readiness, broadband access, and workforce training. However, we have had some areas requiring further attention, including some of the social work assessments and the household accommodation pressures, and our response times to the freedom of information requests. That, as ever, the report considers performance across the council. Whilst I'll do my best to try and answer the questions I can as a portfolio holder, I will be reliant upon others within cabinet and the officers in terms of providing the detail on some of the points you might bring up. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, does anybody have any? Oh, Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. There are 3 areas that I would like to ask. I understand the comments about may need assistance from the appropriate portfolio holders. Mentioned in the report at 8.12, 8.16 and 8.17. First one is the street lights, and the slow progress has been exacerbated by reduced levels of staffing, by care, which reflects reductions in spend. It is part of the consultation budget, which has just been completed, and I think overwhelmingly it was in favour of it. So I don't know if there's any update on that or anything that we can do to improve the staffing, to increase the speed, because the more lights that are changed does reduce our ongoing revenue costs. And then in 8.16, it does concern me that the rises in absence due to stress has gone up by 25%. I would assume there are others also looking into that. The council is being subject to change, quite a lot of change. So it is a concern that has been there already, and there may be more coming up. So I don't know if there's anything can help with that. And then also the FOIs. And again, I referred to it the last time, I think. It seems to have dropped off. But the question is that a new corporate FOI system is currently being designed in partnership with PwC as part of the customer journey programme. Is there any date when this new system will be introduced so that we can actually see us climbing towards where legally we should be? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, so I'm not totally sure this is the right place for the street lighting question, but I'm sure that Rob will provide you with an answer on that. And perhaps Laura could give some information about the work of WBC about the FOI system or not. Or James can do that. Okay. Do you want to go first?
I don't want to get too far into the street lighting bit because that is out of my sphere.
Yeah, and I
the only
just
bit
think
I understand is there's always going to be a percentage of the lights which are difficult for various other reasons to make the changes to, and there's things like the historic lights and so on. That's the only other bit I know of in that part of the world.
Yeah, and I think probably it's probably something to raise at cabinet. James, would you like to answer the question about the FOIs?
Yeah. So, just in terms of all those, sorry, absolutely correct. The street lighting, working through that, it has been taken longer than expected, but nevertheless, that's been come to a close now. In terms of the sickness absence, absolutely we monitor this. We have it identified as a strategic risk around wellbeing. We've noticed sickness has been rising. There is an impact over the winter months of just cough, colds, and influenza over that, which is increased. But we are seeing absence due to stress has been the height for a period of time now over the year. It's always tended to be in the top 3 or 4, but it's been there consistently now as number 1 and number 2 over the last 12 months. Hence, we are looking at how we can mitigate that risk of that getting worse. And there are various options and things that we're putting in place on the back of that. As you would expect, any sort of sickness absence, there's not a simple thing that you can do. There are lots of different factors that make that up. Some people, if you take stress, for example, they can be short-term periods, they can be long-term periods, it can be work-based, or it can be other factors that lead up to that. It's understanding that and dealing with that on a case-by-case basis, which is what we're trying to do. But just But the only assurance I can provide is that we're absolutely aware of that issue and we are dealing with it as best as we possibly can, and we are factoring in the element in relation to, for example, voluntary redundancies. That can actually exacerbate the situation, or it can actually improve the situation, depending on how that system falls. In terms of the freedom of information, this is one of those areas where we have to constantly push on this to stay on top of it. We have a lot of FOIs that come in on a daily basis, let alone weekly and monthly. We were at a much lower level of performance in previous years. We pushed that up and we got it to over 75%. That's dropped back slightly now to the 69% that's been reported here. That's based on the statutory 20 days. We have a separate marker which is around 40 days, and that's been discussed with the ICO. So although that's not accepted as a kind of a national target, the work that we do with the ICO is making sure that we don't go beyond that 40 days wherever possible. That's kind of a secondary target within that. In terms of the FOI system, yes, we're working with PwC. They've worked hard with the information governance team. There are a number of elements to what that FOI system looks like. One is about making sure we collect the information in simple, digestible ways. Another part of that is identifying, and this is where the customer journey work comes in, is identifying those areas and trends where we can just get information onto the website in advance, so we don't actually need an FOI. And it's perfectly permissible for somebody asking a question for us just to say that information is available on the website. And that therefore reduces the workload associated with that. So FOI is a difficult area for us because it's across the whole of the authority. It's not something you can just centralise and deal with, because that expertise is held around the organisation. And then you also have an FOI that comes in, which looks like it's a service request, but there's also a legal or a financial or whatever part to the question as well, which means it has to be spread around the organisation and dealt with. It feels like I'm giving excuses, but the reality is it's quite a difficult process to work through. And unless you are constantly on top of it, and I've said this before, if there's one thing we need to be constantly on top of, it's the financial position, not the FOIs, if I'm being completely honest. So those things will slip in between those times.
Chairman, the question was, do we know when the new customer journey programme is going to be reached, and so that it can be improved? I'm not sure if there's any indication when that might be.
Yeah, it is in place now, but it's a developing piece of work. So there's elements that we say further development will happen. That development will happen for the next 10 years, and it's just a constant evolving. But in terms of the basic system, that's working now. There's nothing to see. It's just working in the background, which enables the FOI process to work through. So I won't go into the detail, but the way things are sent out to collect the information, it's all held within our system.
Okay, so I'd like to say something. Oh, sorry, Rosemary, you asked your question.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to note again that it's disappointing to see that EHCPs are so far behind. I recognise that there are mitigations in place and there's a lot going on to try to rectify that. If there's anything further that you can add to what's in the report, that would be of interest. And I also wanted to commend the team for the improvement on households in B&Bs. Again, I know it's slightly behind the target, but we know that there's more homes coming online shortly. Perhaps an update on when that would be good if that's possible.
Okay, so I'm going to get Kirsty, who's online and got a hand up to answer that question. Because of course Laura and her team do a fantastic job, but all they basically collect the performance data. So they're not directly involved in any of these things. The work's been ongoing for probably about 18 months, 2 years now. And the idea behind the performance reporting is actually so that the councillors can look and see where we're performing well, where we're not performing so well. And it gives you another indication of where to be asked, what directorate to be asking the questions of. Hence, we get to Rosemary's question to Kirsty. So, Kirsty, if you'd like to answer that, thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, just to give you some reassurance, Rosemary, because I know this is an area you've tracked. So the timeliness continues to improve. It was an average of 35 weeks in March 2024, and we put extra resources into that compared to 24.1 weeks recorded in December last year. So a great improvement. But 20 weeks is the goal, isn't it, and the statutory expectation. So 56.2% of VHC plans were issued within 20 weeks, and that's above the national average. That's where we were getting to. We did expect some slip. We knew this would happen with the resizing and restructuring of the team over sort of November, December, so that was expected, further training. But now they have met. We've also agreed, because of that review that they did at the end of last year, there's going to be an annual review, a recovery programme that's now underway, and we've got 1,300 requiring an update. So we've dedicated a get this name right, a recovery team, and that started work mid-December, and initially that's been set up. January they've been at it and they're making good progress. There's an actual dedicated team to tackle that, to bring that back up into line. And EHCP quality is still being sustained, multi-agency and audits, external feedback, Ofsted schools and the DFE that have been monitoring this are shown that improvements are still being sustained. So we knew there'd be a drop. We've addressed it. We've realigned the teams, resized, and hopefully you'll start to see some real improvements. Does that make sense? Is that enough information?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much indeed, Kirsty. So do we have any more questions for No? Okay, well, thank you very much indeed. And I think what you do is really, really valued, and it's very, very helpful to us all. And there you go, Rosie's got.
Yeah, sorry, I did ask a second question.
Oh, sorry.
Households in B&B. I know that we've got more accommodation
okay.
online. Is there any information on that?
I don't
think we've got anyone
know that they've got.
Claire, can I come back in on that? We discussed this yesterday, Rosemary, and I think Councillor Carroll, portfolio holder, said that by the end of the financial year we will not have anyone currently in B&B, so all of our temporary accommodation will be in our own properties. Obviously that's subject to demand, but he was very hopeful that by the end of the financial year we'll have his words were we won't have anybody in B&B. So
thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's a good question. And again, while we're here, it's maybe one of the performance indicators that when you're looking to add one, maybe there's another one for you. Because I think as we go along, what we do is we add more and more indicators. So it might be one that you might be worth having a look at that. Okay, so thank you very much indeed. Is everyone sorry?
It's in the report.
And what is?
Households in B&B.
Oh, but I thought you wanted the actual percentage of. I thought you wanted a bit more detail.
No, I was asking. It's okay. I've got my answer, but it is in the report.
There's none in there, or
no? It's in the report that it's where it is in terms of the target, but it's expected with the new stuff coming online. I suppose you were just following up on that.
Oh right, okay.
Exactly what does that mean? And
okay. So is there a specific performance indicator for that? There is. Okay, well done. I know we talked about having one. I missed that one. Okay. Thanks, Rosemary. So everyone content to move on? Yeah.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So item number 8 is the financial strategy. James, do you want to start off on that one?
Yeah. Chair, do a quick introduction. Okay, so the report that's presented here is the financial strategy for 25-26 through 29-30. As I mentioned before, and I'll reiterate it again, this is the report that is basically going to cabinet. However, you'll spot through there are a number of markers where there are points being raised which will be completed. Further work will be produced and analysed and built in the final report that will go through to full council. Now, I understand that the committee may say, well, that makes it more difficult for us to scrutinise the financial strategy, which is absolutely correct, and I have to hold my hands up in relation to that. Nevertheless, what we are doing
The reason we've done it this way is because we have the collaborative group, collaborative budget group meetings happening on a weekly basis, which allows all of the opposition group members, as well as the leader, the chair of this committee, and portfolio holders as well, to run through the financial information on a weekly basis. There is still work to be completed in relation to that group, and some of that work is continuing into next week. Some of the information that's been provided to that group, I felt it was more important to allow some of that to settle and to have further conversations about that before we reported it in the final report, which goes through to full council. So what that means is that although the majority of this report will be as is, there will be a number of elements in there where there'll be further information or further clarity around some of the figures there. The most notable ones of those would be we don't yet have the finalised position in relation to transformation costs for next year, and this includes whether or how we would engage with the transformation partner, which at the moment is PwC, but decisions have yet to be taken around that. We need to put some markers in around that so that we have the ability to continue that, should we wish to, into the next financial year. There is also, I mentioned it earlier, in relation to the financial position around the North West Relief Road, and the continuation of that scheme or not, as the case may be, and what the financial implications of that would be. There's also the pay policy. There are a number of elements like that that all will be included in the final council report. What we have here, though, is an overarching summary of that strategy, and the focus tends to be on the 25-26 financial year, although the strategy sets that out over the next 3-4 years. The summary position is set out in paragraph 2.6, and apologies for the highlighting. We didn't. There's no reason for that to be highlighted if it's appearing in your reports. It was purely wasn't taken off as we were working our way through the finalisation of that report. So my apologies for that. There may be other areas where there's highlighting in there. The 3 bullet points there in 2.6. £8.8 million is the proposed savings for next year, and those are set out. That includes £3.7 million that were previously identified in the MTFS from February last year, and those are set out in the report. There are demand mitigations of £11 million. So this going back to the earlier point around growth into social care. We've looked at the growth into social care, and we've identified a number of areas where the original figure that we identified can be mitigated. Nevertheless, there is an equation to kind of work through in that. So we've identified where those demand mitigations would be, and that comes to just under £11 million. The savings not achieved from the current financial year. So we had the discussion about where the overspend is in this current financial year. That is different to the impact of non-delivery of those savings in next year. So very simply, in the current year, there may be a one-off way in which we can deliver a saving that may not be available to us next year, so that saving comes back. Alternatively, there may be things in the current year where we've made a saving, but we only get 2 months benefit of that. In the next year, we'll have the full 12 months benefit of it, and everything in between. So the assessment of the current savings that are not delivered sustainably for the future comes to 38.3 million. Actually, as at the dashboard this morning, that 38.3 has come down to 38.1 because it's constantly moving. So this will continue to move right up until the end of March. I would love it if that 38.3 went down to 0 by the end of the year, but I can't believe that though. But I do imagine it will continue to reduce. But there is a risk that it could increase as we work our way through the detail. As I mentioned earlier, the detail review that budget holders are doing as at period 10 could have an impact on that figure. So you put those figures together, and that gives us the equivalent saving for next financial year. In terms of our actual gap, we would talk about the £8.8 million in that first bullet point. In terms of the overarching picture that we have to manage, it's the 38 plus the 11 plus the 8.8. So the detail is set out in the appendix 1, which is the medium-term financial strategy itself. There's lots of information within there. I'm happy to take questions on any part of that and the way in which that's built up. Some of those tables are quite complex. Some of those we tried to simplify. The only thing I would say is they are consistent with previous years' reporting. So it enables, even if we wanted to try and simplify some of those tables, it then makes reference back to the previous year more difficult. So we tend to continue in the same vein. Appendix 2 sets out the capital strategy. So again, this was referred to by Ben earlier in the meeting. The capital strategy is different to the capital programme. So the strategy sets out the approach for not only what would go into the capital programme itself, i.e. what will be spent in 25-26 and future years, but also those areas where there are priority schemes and also aspirational schemes, depending on the status, depending on the funding availability, and based upon the priority of those schemes as well. So that's an overall introduction to the way that the papers work, but I'll stop talking and have to take any questions.
Okay, have we got any questions of anybody? Roger's bound to have a question.
No. I was waiting for others to come in, Chairman. I note on page 48 or 57 the resilience index. I presume we're the dark coloured right towards the bottom, which shows where we are compared with level of reserves compared to nearest neighbours.
Yeah.
If one goes back, one can see how the reserves are, and on figure 29 shows where the risk-based target should be, etc. there, and one can go further back as well, which sees how the reserves have fallen over the last 3-4 years from where they are down to now, and the general reserves, and I couldn't really understand their report, the general reserves have actually been falling for the last 5 years. I think there's a slowly downward trend all the way through, and it refers to the earlier part of the meeting where I brought up the budget savings that are there, and the number of times where, for one reason or another, they haven't been attained. So I am concerned about that. And also, I note if one goes on to, and I just had it there a few minutes, if you go on to page 86 and the following ones, there's a number of savings there which are down to be made. Some of them were left over from 23-24, some of them 24-25, and some of them 25-26. How confident are we that the delayed savings that are there are going to be delivered in the new financial year?
Have to take that, Chair.
Yeah, sorry, James. I'm just looking for the page.
Why I asked that while you're looking, Chairman, is there's one there, of course, which is was down and put in before about waste and saving £600,000, and that I presume, although it isn't detailed there, that I presume is to go in for a 3-weekly or charging more for the green bins. If one looks at the consultation that was carried out, that was overwhelmingly rejected. But I'm not sure about the 600,000 and what it actually means. Sorry, I don't know. I'm asking questions about the 600,000 waste specifically. My apologies, my microphone wasn't on.
Okay, James.
Okay, so just in terms of waste, so as part of the capital budget process, we agreed the questions that would go out for public consultation, and that included consultation on 3-weekly collections, general waste on its own, and 2 weekly collections on recyclates, or 3 weekly collections for both general waste and recyclates. We asked for people's opinions on that. At the same time, we were looking to see what options we had around deliverability of that, and also as part of that, a third option came out, which would be 3 weekly collection of recyclates, but 2 weekly collection of general waste. And then further to that, there was further discussion around, well, will we having weekly food collections being made in 26, 27? And there was concern raised by members, but also in the public consultation around a 3-weekly collection around general waste, which included food, if it's a question about whether that's acceptable or not. So on the back of that, we have removed the savings that were identified around the 2 and 3 weekly collections, given the actual deliverability timetable for that, and clearly the public consultation responses to that. There is also a question being raised around charging for garden waste as well, and so what we've done is we've pulled together a review of waste more generally. So we've left a savings target in there, but we've not identified that against any specific areas. There won't be a number of those things that we've talked about won't actually be going forward. For example, the green waste, for example, the 3-weekly collection, just to be clear on that. However, we do feel that there are other alternatives that we could consider during the year, and hence there is a figure being put in against that, which is about continuing existing arrangements and looking to see whether there are other options in the back of that to deliver. So, in summary, in relation to that saving, there are opportunities to speak to the contractor around delivering additional reductions or savings within the year. However, they're not tied to the existing arrangements that we went out to consultation. That helps. Probably for you to even more.
If I can, Chairman, so the £600,000 saving in waste is still going to be there, and you are confident that it's going to be delivered?
So through your chair, in terms of there is still at the moment a saving of £600,000. That will be discussed at the collaborative budget group meeting on Monday before a final position is held in relation to that. And do I have confidence in that? I believe what I've been told is there are options and opportunities around how we can save that. I don't have the detail of that, but as it stands at the moment, that's the figure that we've got.
Okay.
And Chairman, the graph I was referring to are on page 49 or 58.
Right, okay.
Which shows how the general reserves and the earmarked reserves have fallen since 2021. For the general reserves, I think the general downward trend in 2019, and one can see what the earmarked reserves, they were bolstered slightly in 21 because of the COVID that was there, and money that came in. So earmarked, you can see where they are now compared to what they were pre-COVID levels, when the budgets were smaller than what they are now, let alone etc.
Okay, so I'm going to bring Gwyneth in just to give a broad overview, I think.
Specifically, Chair, it was about the comment around the waste, I think.
Right, okay.
And I thought that was a good example of how we have to plan for the future. And there are all sorts of opportunities of how we rearrange the waste situation and things we could do. But that is a really good example that we have to put a figure in place for the future. This is about looking forward, not looking backwards. But we don't have the minute detail of what that's going to be yet. But we do believe from past history and what we've been told by the officers who deal with those arenas that there are opportunities to deliver in that arena moving forward. And that is where we business plan for the future. And that will be brought forward. And if there are policy changes, that will come through Cabinet in the normal way, whoever is in administration. But hopefully, as James says, we will bring that through to the collaborative budgets as and when we have more detail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Roger.
Thank you, Chairman. That highlights, I think, what Grant Thornton in their audit report said to the audit committee, and it's their comments on Shropshire Council. And they made comments about the number of years that the budgets that have been set have been found to be, I'm not sure if they used the word, but it's my word, not to be realistic and attainable. And are the reductions, is the budget, which is being considered by Cabinet tomorrow and going to Council, will they be achieved? Because the last few years they have not. And our auditors, Grant Thornton, did pick up about the big failure, and I referred earlier on.
Chair, could I come back on that, please?
57% and 77% of the savings that were obtained. We can't continue doing that.
Can I just stop you there, Roger, because I don't like what you said there, failure. That's completely the wrong language. I've got a queue of people here. I'm going to get Gwynn in first, and then Ben J.
I'd just like to refute what Councillor Evans said. The whole purpose of us putting reserves in, which you didn't want us to do, was the fact that that was a security and a contingency plan if we weren't there to deliver the savings in total. By having those reserves in place, we delivered the budget, and we will continue to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Ben, have you got comments to make about that? You need to put your mic on, Ben.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Right, start again. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick points. It is always really helpful that Councillor Evans is picking up on points around reserves. He also picked up, I know, that actually there was a kind of bubble effect that happened around the COVID period, and we were all councils were carrying quite a lot of the government money that was issued during that period through into future years. So I think it's really important to recognise that different councils will see different patterns within the reserves. Reserves are the outcome of an awful lot of other processes. So while I think it's absolutely correct to look at that and to consider whether or not the reserves position is where, if you like, we would like it to be, I think it's also really important to recognise how many other processes go into that. There are many councils, some larger than us, who get by quite happily with lower levels of reserves, and that's the way that they operate. Other councils could be smaller than us and they have higher levels of reserves. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're better run. So I think it's just being cautious a little bit around that. So that a note of caution around that. But I think that the general discussion, I think it is really helpful there. And I would echo that from a professional perspective is what I'm trying to say. I'm not passing judgment on the ability of the politicians, not at all. There's something around the point as well around the realism of the budgets. Again, I think it's worth just recognising the course of the last 5 to 10 years and the way in which local government has been part of wider impacts. We've talked about COVID. There was also obviously inflationary impacts globally that we've seen. The realism of budgets in a lot of areas, I think I would be cautious about considering realism. There are some very important safeguards, including the Section 25 assurances, which James needs to provide. And it has to be James, it can't be me, although I might be able to advise on some of it. James is the 151 officer. James needs to provide assurances around the robustness of the estimates and the adequacy of the reserves. That's the phrasing we have to use. That goes to council each year. I think the point here is that budgets for all councils, and we are no different to other councils in this respect, have been stretched in recent years. It is no surprise in that vein to see that actually a lot of the easy stuff, if you like, if there is ever any easy stuff around savings, that's been done. The stuff that we're tackling now is more difficult, which is why we're seeing some of these things which are more complicated to deliver. And we had this conversation around the Q3 monitoring report. The more complicated stuff to deliver is more challenging. It is a dynamic environment. Sometimes we discover things which we didn't expect, which are making it easier, and sometimes we find things which we didn't expect that make things harder. I think the question overall, is the budget realistic? Yes, I think the budget is realistic. That's what the finance team and the officers are here to do. The question is, how far can we go to manage a situation which is almost by definition very challenging to manage? A little bit of a rambling response. Apologies for that, Chair, but I hope that gives a bit of a response there. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm conscious people are starting to pack up. So have we got any more questions? Any more questions? No?
If I can, Chairman, there is a lot of pages to the capital, but as I understand it, previously at this committee, there was a report about strip funding and using the car parks to assist to provide revenue via the reason capitalisation that the government introduced of using capital with could be used to actually help the revenue budget. As I understand it, the revenue budget needs to find some money by the end of March to pay for redundancy, PwC and transformation. How is that progressing? Because again, as James Walton said, March the 31st, you can't roll things over. You need to show legally that there is the council is on the positive side. And as I understand it, there was a request made to this meeting in public about it. And there is that. And also, will we know about the Northwest Relief Road by the council meeting in February? Because media reports say there is maybe some doubt whether the Northwest Relief Road will be going to the council in February. And it is part of the capital programme, which is here.
So I shall leave the last words to our illustrious leader.
Well, actually, I was going to leave the last word to James. All I was going to say, Roger, is that Cabinet agreed that we will not take the income strip model forward. So that gives you the answer to that. And I don't, the point about the Northwest Relief Road is I am waiting for the planning decision to be issued. Full stop. But I don't know if James, if you wanted to just talk a little bit more about the income strip, but if not, then I'm quite happy to have the last word. Thank you.
I mean, I think it's irrelevant because it's not happening. So
that's right. If you want to.
No. I mean, I think that's okay. So we're quite happy to know the report. Before we finish, I'd just like to say, because this is the last meeting of the season, if you like, before the elections, I'd just like to say a huge thank you to Willem, who has been absolutely amazing. He's come to us at every meeting. He's a fountain of knowledge and he's really helped. So I want to say how much I appreciate that. And also to Ben and James and the other members of the finance team. I think it's really, really improved the meetings having the portfolio holder here and taking part. Roger.
No, it's just I say thank you to Gwilym. He said at the start of the year, as did the leader, there'll be more information supplied. Yeah. I still think there should be more, but I will say to Gwilym, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's worth noting.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Roger. It's much appreciated.
Because it is tough times, and there is a bit about, we are all in this together because we all want to see Shropshire Council going forward. So I wish you all well, and thank you very much indeed, everybody.